Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about the running back strength of schedule for the 2024 fantasy football season. Now, as we typically do, over the course of the offseason and even during the regular season, we want to focus on metrics such as running back efficiency, the volume of overall opportunity that they're getting, whether it's rushing attempts, targets, red zone utilization, overall snap counts, third down usage, perhaps even tendencies for offensive coordinators as to how they use their running backs in certain circumstances. When we focus on that overall data and metrics, it is very much so beneficial in terms of determining the potential successes or failures of our running backs going into a given season or potentially even a week. But one of the pieces of information that I always love to utilize, and for those of you who are familiar with the channel, I've been utilizing for years on end, whether that be within individual weeks or over the course of an entire season, is strength of schedule. When we take into account the efforts of the 11 defenders on the opposite side of the field, men who are being paid to stop our running backs every single week, this category truly does give us a greater understanding as to whether our running backs are going to potentially find future success or failure within a given week or an upcoming season. So on the right side of the screen, I've gone ahead and displayed the 2024 running back strength of schedule for the season. And the number one ranked team being the Baltimore Ravens means that Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens, newly added, is going to have the easiest strength of schedule between weeks 1 through 17. I exclude week 18 in specific because, again, if you play a week 18 championship, you are at a far higher risk of potentially having your players sit, whether it's due to injury or them preparing for the NFL playoffs. But nonetheless, from weeks 1 through 17, going into 2024, the Baltimore Ravens, followed by the Washington Commanders, Cleveland Browns, Atlanta Falcons, Pittsburgh Steelers, etc., have the easiest strength of schedules, while on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the Houston Texans at the very bottom, all by themselves with the most difficult strength of schedule. Now, besides just giving you guys this visual indicator, I want to talk about the statistics and the metrics and data that I've collected in order to determine this for the 2024 season. And like I do in every single one of my videos, justify it, then give you guys even more of an understanding of details based on different spectrums of time. We want to focus on weeks 1 through 7, the beginning of the year, weeks 8 through 14, and of course, week 15 through 17, the fantasy playoffs where champions are crowned. So as I progress throughout today's video, I'm going to go ahead, share these statistics and data that I collected in order to determine these overall rankings in terms of running back strength of schedule, something that I do differently than others, but why I've found success in my overall methods. And going into 2024, which running backs we could potentially trust based on their upcoming schedule, as I'll go into even further detail as we continue on. Before we get there, a couple reminders for those of you who have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2024 season with the singular goal of trying to help you guys capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. We are on our way to 100,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough. Additionally, for those of you guys who want more content or more data, statistics, all that kind of jazz, be sure to get your hands on my 2024 fantasy football draft guide by checking out Underdog Fantasy right now. For those of you who sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, you're going to get my 2024 fantasy football draft guide, the subsequent rankings that come with them. Those rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, includes flex, everything. But those rankings are also going to be updated every week over the course of August. So you'll get an email from me with those updated rankings. But the emails won't stop there. Every single Sunday morning from weeks 1 through 18, I'll continue to send you weekly rankings so that we can go ahead and help you capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. So for those of you who are trying to get your hands on my 2024 fantasy football draft guide, be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of $10 just once. And of course, check out the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. Additionally, for those of you who have already made a first time deposit in the past or already signed up via Underdog in the past using my code or somebody else's code, be sure to go ahead and check out Patreon. You can find all this content and more. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get into talking about the running back strength of schedule and how I determined the overall rankings and tiers that you previously saw on screen. So when you go ahead and look at the 2023 overall statistics based on running back rushing statistics isolated, the teams allowed to opposing running backs, we found the following. The Carolina Panthers in 2023, from weeks 1 through 18, allowed the most running back rushing yards, touchdowns that accumulated 17.95 fantasy points per game allowed to opposing running backs. Now, there's a lot that I just said there. You just have to understand that the Carolina Panthers were the best matchup in 2023. Any week in which we were, having our running backs face them, we fired it up and we didn't even doubt whether or not we were going to find success because they were giving up a boatload of statistics on the ground to opposing running backs, followed by the Seattle Seahawks, Arizona Cardinals, New York Giants, etc. Now, if we go to the other half of this overall conversation, defenses that played extremely well against running backs and did not allow them very many points, we have the Detroit Lions, who were the best within that overall category. In fact, for the last season and a half, midway through the 2022 year, this defense really started to tighten up and did not allow much and have not allowed rushing yards and touchdowns to opposing running backs at a vast capacity in comparison to the rest of the league since then. Of course, the San Francisco 49ers, Chicago Bears, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, all great defenses in terms of stopping the run. But what I want you to understand is that I'm using running back rushing statistics isolated because what I have witnessed over the course of the last 3 seasons and what I've tested in terms of overall data and found is that receiving statistics at the running back position do not fluctuate based on overall matchup. Whether it is a advantageous matchup or disadvantageous matchup, it is irrelevant for running backs in the receiving game because often the biggest determining factor whether or not they're going to find success within a matchup via receiving often has to do with overall game script or the team's tendency to utilize the running back within the receiving game. So I wanted to go ahead and give you an example of this from the 2023 season. As you guys can see on screen, we have the New York Jets receiving game via running backs. This includes all of their games, along with the overall ranking of the team that they face within that given week. That ranking corresponding to the running back receiving statistics allowed to running backs over the course of the 2023 season. The fantasy points that they allowed per game, which of course would be the middle pillar there, the fantasy points that were actually allowed within that game, and the over-under. What I was able to find just off of the New York Jets overall receiving game. And the reason why I wanted to talk about specifically the New York Jets is because they exposed their running backs to the second most overall targets throughout the entirety of the 2023 season. They targeted their running backs 146 times. Regardless of matchup difficulty, whether it was a hard, medium, or easy matchup within the given year, the fantasy point per game output of Breece Hall and the other running backs that were associated with this backfield were identical. In fact, they found more success in more difficult matchups last season based on fantasy points allowed to running backs within the receiving game, regardless of being a half PPR or a full PPR scoring format. Again, the team's tendencies are often going to determine running back receiving success. So when we go ahead and continue on to the future, all of the running back strength of schedule is isolated for running back rushing statistics. Just putting that into perspective. Now, as we continue into 2024, we have to take into account that a lot of the teams in the performances of last season are not going to be able to carry over, mainly because we saw different teams either change their rosters by drafting new players from the NFL draft, signing free agents, or even losing players who they either cut or potentially retire. When you remove Aaron Donald from the Los Angeles Rams defense, it is certainly going to make a difference. So we want to take into account what we are potentially going to see going into 2024. So what I went ahead and did recently was get every single depth chart from this overall training camp of all starting defenses. I went ahead and took all of the starters, found their run stopping grades from the 2023 season, and found the team average in terms of run stopping grade. We find the following, with the Atlanta Falcons having the highest run stop grade amongst all teams based on 2023 performances now going into 2024 with their new updated roster, followed by the Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots, Detroit Lions, San Francisco 49ers, Pittsburgh Steelers, while on the other end of the spectrum, teams that are going to struggle in terms of stopping the run based on their grades from last season are the Cincinnati Bengals, Los Angeles Rams, and Giants. But I want you to understand, these grades are going to fluctuate. Players don't stay the same. You either get better or worse in football. And the reality is, when you take into account different metrics like injuries, these numbers are going to fluctuate. They will never be stable because in a given game, a player can play out of his mind and have an incredible performance. The next week, he could be terrible. But these are the averages across the board. So when you take into account the overall fantasy points in terms of rushing statistics isolated allowed in 2023, the potential grades going into 2024, of course, we find weeks 1 through 17 strength of schedule, which you earlier saw via that tier list with the Baltimore Ravens and Washington Commanders with the easiest strength of schedule going into this upcoming season. But the separation between them and perhaps, the New York Giants is 1.5 points based on my overall structure. Now, in comparison to the Houston Texans, we have a 5-point difference there exactly. But just taking into account, there is separation, but it is not at a significant capacity between a lot of these teams based on my overall findings. But let's go ahead and let's transition and let's talk about different spectrums of time going into the 2024 season in which we can find success for running backs, and perhaps we could even strategize for our upcoming drafts based on upcoming schedules. So from weeks 1 through 7, to start off the season hot, of course, many of us want to go ahead and begin with a win. But the question is, are we going to find an initial victory with some of these running backs? Again, the top overall schedule for running backs belong to the Washington Commanders, Los Angeles Chargers, who, of course, both those backfields currently consist of a lot of uncertainty. There's a reason why both Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler are both, RB3s based on their overall ADP as it currently stands. But both of them could very easily come out of the gates on fire and find a lot of success. I mean, their upcoming schedule to begin. I understand that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a good run-stopping defense in terms of stopping opposing running backs, and they have done that for the last 5 years. But after week 1, weeks 2 through 4, I mean, there's a lot of success to be found against the New York Giants, Cincinnati Bengals, and Arizona Cardinals, who, as defenses overall, cannot stop the run, and they have demonstrated that not only in 2023, but even prior seasons. So going forward, I'm thinking to myself, maybe we want to go ahead and invest in one of these two running backs, because there is a potential every single season where you can invest in a running back late in your draft and then immediately flip them for a trade. The most immediate memory I have going back to 2022, weeks 1 through 3, I remember that Austin Eckler throughout that season, who finished as the number 1 overall back by the end of the year, from weeks 1 through 3 was averaging 10.8 fantasy points per game. Throughout those first 3 weeks was the number 20 overall running back in fantasy football. Again, didn't find much success early, but I remember going back in the day, after weeks 1 through 3, I put out a video saying we need to trade for Austin Eckler. He hasn't scored touchdowns yet. Just wait until he does. And if, of course, he eventually did, and he finishes the number 1 overall back within that year. Even if we remember last season, weeks 1 through 3, Jahmyr Gibbs throughout that span of time was RB28 overall, averaging 8.3 fantasy points per game. And I remember putting out a video last season after the first couple weeks saying we need to trade for Jahmyr Gibbs. He is underproducing right now. Just wait till he starts to find himself success. And boy, did he ever. Nonetheless, maybe we want to go ahead and invest in some of these running backs, Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, potentially get one of the pieces of this Los Angeles Chargers backfield in order to find some potential success early and then maybe ship them off if, in fact, we don't believe that it is going to be sustainable. I remember a couple seasons back, we started the year with guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and James Robinson on fire. And then, of course, eventually, they dwindled out. So perhaps maybe we want to invest in running backs like a Jerome Ford, who to begin the year has the 4th easiest strength of schedule at the position. Perhaps if in fact we're in a situation in which, of course, Nick Chubb is not ready at the beginning of the year, this could be an investment very similar to Zach Moss, but has even more upside. The starting running back is not going to be there, but you know that the running back and the offensive line are going to be efficient enough in a run-first scheme to find success. So the overall investment of getting someone like Jerome Ford can not only pay off early within the season because of an incredible overall matchups that he's immediately going to find success in, but also continue that success for the remainder of the season if in fact Nick Chubb doesn't find himself, fully healthy, or of course finding a rhythm within this offense because, again, he's coming off of a devastating knee injury. Now, when we go ahead and continue on from weeks 1 through 7, we have some of the more difficult beginnings of a potential season. Of course, the Seattle Seahawks at the very bottom of this overall conversation. Again, when you have to take on teams like the Miami Dolphins, the Detroit Lions, the San Francisco 49ers, those are 3 really tough defenses to begin with. But we have seen Kenneth Walker, regardless of matchups, even last season, find a lot of success because you have to remember, not only is this running back rushing statistics isolated, this doesn't take into account potential receiving utilization that these running backs are absolutely going to get. And we'll talk about that for different instances going forward. But like the New York Jets being at number 30 here should not worry you for a guy like Breece Hall. Yes, he takes on San Francisco week 1, but this does not include the 4 catches he's going to make per game on average over the course of the 2024 year that is absolutely going to elevate his overall game within a season. Now, moving on to the second span of time I wanted to focus on, weeks 8 through 14, the completion of the fantasy football regular season. Of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the top, but there's a lot of running backs at the top of this conversation that have really good schedules. I mean, we're talking about Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, followed by guys like Derrick Henry, Kenneth Walker, Saquon Barkley, Achane and Mostert, Breece Hall, Montgomery and Gibbs. Again, a lot of running backs that are highly valued who are going to have themselves fantastic strength of schedules throughout this span of time, which again is only going to elevate their potential for success in fantasy football. But when we go ahead and flip the conversation to running backs who aren't going to have themselves great, strength of schedules throughout the span of time, the Indianapolis Colts, the Green Bay Packers. I mean, when I think about the Green Bay Packers, looking at that schedule, taking on Detroit twice, Chicago, San Francisco, Miami, again, these are great run-stopping defenses, and it is a little bit worrisome, but nonetheless, I'm still investing in Josh Jacobs because I know he's going to get himself 50-plus receptions. I know he's going to have himself the vast majority of the overall red zone opportunities and, of course, touches within this backfield. opportunity leads to success. And even though the overall efforts of those defenses are going to make an impact, there's still the efforts that he will put forth, his offensive line will put forth, the blocking receivers, tight ends, the quarterback, etc., that is going to even it all out. So do not let this completely drive you away from a specific player. Just allow it to promote other players because they have such easy strength of schedules in comparison to the rest. So let's go ahead and finish off with these different spectrums of time with the fantasy football playoffs. Weeks 15 through 17, and immediately you see the Indianapolis Colts and, of course, the Atlanta Falcons at the top. I mean, we're talking about hero running backs yesterday in terms of drafting a stud running back in the first round and then following by getting positional advantages at wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback in the following rounds until you, of course, go back in and invest in a running back between rounds 7 and 8. But when we talk about Bijan Robinson and Jonathan Taylor potentially leading us to the promised land and helping us capture a 2024 fantasy football championship, that is absolutely on the table. I mean, even Derrick Henry is in this top tier conversation, which is why, once again, he is the thumbnail of this episode, and he has been the thumbnail of our running back strength of schedule for each of the last 2 seasons, because for some reason, every team he gets associated with just happens to have a very easy strength of schedule within that overall season. Nonetheless, when we look at specifically the Indianapolis Colts, look at their schedule. They take on Denver, which, again, maybe by the time they get to week 15, they'll be better, but they're not expected to be a great team. Neither is Tennessee, and certainly neither is the New York Giants. These could very easily be matchups in which Jonathan Taylor separates himself and wins the league. I mean, the Atlanta Falcons taking on Las Vegas, again, not a great team. The New York Giants and the Washington Commanders. There is so much potential for success within these overall matchups. I'm anticipating these running backs to take over and, of course, lead to a lot of fantasy football championships. We'll return to this once we get to week 15. And I'll remind you guys, this is the reason why we took guys like Jonathan Taylor and Bijan Robinson in these early rounds so that they can deliver late within the season. Nonetheless, I also wanted to remind you guys, again, even though the San Francisco 49ers may sit at number 31, Christian McCaffrey is still going to average 23 fantasy points per game. Do not let this go ahead and sway you from drafting Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall. He deserves it and absolutely needs to be at the top. But in comparison to the rest of the field, of course, has a difficult strength of schedule, taking on Miami and the Detroit Lions in weeks 16 and 17. But I mean, we saw what Christian McCaffrey was able to do against Detroit in the NFC Championship game. He is in no danger. You should not worry about the difficulty of his expected schedule. Okay, so getting back to the overall tier list and rankings that we have on screen. Like I mentioned earlier, of course, Derrick Henry is someone that, again, even though he is up there in age, and even though he is joining a new team, the volume of opportunity that he is going to be given and the matchups that he will have available to him this upcoming season are advantageous. But when you look at like the top 10 overall strength of schedule teams, and you compare that to potential top 12 ranked players, I mean, there's only 3 players that I can see off the top of my head: Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Bijan Robinson, ranked 1, 4, and 8 diagonally, all bird teams, by the way, who are within the top 10 of strength of schedule. Outside of that, there is a lot of opportunities for guys like, Brian Robinson Jr., Jerome Ford, Najee Harris / Jalen Warren, potentially the Cincinnati Bengals starting running back Zach Moss. Maybe he can go ahead and do something. Javonte Williams sitting with the Denver Broncos. Of course, Alvin Kamara, as you know, who is going to get himself a lot of receiving utilization, but also has a very advantageous schedule in terms of running back rushing statistics allowed. Again, this is information that we're using in the preseason to determine potential future success throughout the 2024 regular season. But like I said earlier, this category is a valuable one and one that we absolutely want to pay attention to. And as we progress throughout the season, we will continue to isolate it and get ourselves a better understanding as to whether or not our running backs within a given week are going to find potential successes or failures based on the efforts of the defenders on the opposite side of the field. That's why we always, focus on, the starting cornerback of the Miami Dolphins is injured, and fantastic, we have a guy like Justin Jefferson taking on that defense, so he's going to take on the number 2 cornerback. Or Amon-Ra St. Brown takes on the Los Angeles Chargers. Their primary, nickel cornerback is not going to be active in that game. He's going up against the backup. These kind of matchups where there are primary defenders that are missing even elevate the potential for our players to find success. Injuries are absolutely going to be in the conversation as we progress, but nonetheless, do with this information as you will. Thank you everybody for watching. If you want more content like this, be sure to subscribe. Of course, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2024 season in order to help you capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. I'll be back tomorrow with another video like I am every day. Until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.